If you want to take a picture of this, I've uploaded this today, the whole slide presentation, so it's already up there. I'm in the same kind of audiences that you all are, and you wonder, is this anywhere? How much do I have to write down? So maybe you can just sit back and relax and enjoy the message, and know that you could go hit the presentation later at the comfort of your own home. And that Bitly is case sensitive, as it turns out. So watch your capitalization when you're getting back to it. And if you missed this, maybe you'll find me on Twitter later, and I'll post it again also in the meetup comments, just to try to cover all the bases. And maybe you can meet a friend who took the picture if you missed it later. So I'm here to share with you everything that I've learned about web components in the last year and a few months. And web components are just a fascinating thing to me, so I'm very excited to be able to deliver this message to you. And if you wonder what's a web component, fundamentally, I think of it as this. It's a package of presentation and behavior, right? These two things are working coordinated. Web, obviously, is a hint. Everything is delivered and consumed on the web platform. And the widget, the element, whatever you want to call this that you might have remembered in the past work, it's something that can display itself and take user input. Maybe it can go get some data or generate some data. And then again, process it against some business rules and some logic and be a valuable thing on your web page. And I think it's very, very interesting to say, you know, is there something wrong with the World Wide Web that we need this technology? You know, in a lot of ways, there's nothing wrong with the web. Y'all have done amazing things with it for years. We've been able to drive it forward and do so much. But in a way, what's wrong with the web? Everything, right? Especially at the UI level in a lot of ways, because the three languages that drives the front end, you know, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, they don't really offer any opinions, do they, on architecture or organization. In fact, a lot of times it feels like front end development is running with a plate of Jell-O, right? It's always kind of wobbly and not easy, right? If you know what Jell-O is, it's very shiny. Maybe that's not a modern food, I don't know. And it's also easy to, because of that, to redo yourself, you know, to copy and paste your way into delivering something to production. You know, we've all done it. We've all made 8 different versions of buttons or 6 different versions of list boxes. And I encourage us all to just stop doing that. Of course, that's easily said than done. But web components are going to help you achieve drop-in, right? That you can build it once, you can discover all the problems, and then you can drop it in and reuse it. Because JavaScript, CSS, HTML haven't had many opinions on how to organize themselves meaningfully. But now web components are one of these things that will help solve that problem and to deal with that challenge. You know, once you write a UI pattern, you know, that adds business value to your life. So reuse it, drop it in for as many situations as is valid. And then I'm asserting the drop-in is very important, right? And it's also possible, if you run a company or you're very much part of a company, software used to be a business expense, right? But now it's an investment. Like, it seems like every business is a software business anymore. And once you build something, you know, future you is going to benefit from reusing it as much as possible. And reuse is a key software engineering term and an ideal form. In the web, it doesn't really help you do that so much. And web components are something that's going to finally do that well. And like this list here, right, I mentioned like the software engineering techniques. Like this list here, you know, I look at this list and it just gets me very excited as a programmer. These are all core things that have helped us deliver useful stuff throughout history. And a lot of them aren't there in the web front-end world. And web components is thinking about them very mindfully. And these first principles of software engineering, I find them in web components. And so that's why I'm very intrigued by them. That's why I think that these are so interesting. And maybe some of the components, some of these things you've heard before, these qualities, and maybe you haven't. Maybe you kind of recognize them and sort them out intuitively if you haven't used them outright. And admittedly, that slide got a little bit deep and nerdy really quickly. So let me just bottom line it and say this, right? So this is very significant in the web development world. You can create your own tags. They're going to suit your specific needs. You can give attributes to them, which allow you to modify them in the context of that page. And you can mix together your tags that are built in web components with standard default tags to make more complex behavior. And then people are trying to write semantic HTML, right? Semantic HTML? Do people get that word? Like, they're trying to say that what you write, when it's read later, it has meaning. You're using these tags that mean something. Footer, header, nav. But this is going to take it to a whole new game, right? Because you can build your own tags that have your business logic that suit your users' needs. And it seems like, in a way, we've always been trying to make it work with HTML, what they've given us. But now I think you can make HTML work for you in the way you need it, which is fantastic. So my talk and my demo code is predominantly informed by and structured through Polymer. And Polymer is a programmer's tool that's helping me build web components. Where did Polymer come from? The good folks at Google. And I say Polymer is a programmer's tool. What does that mean? You've probably heard very much about JavaScript frameworks, the MVC frameworks, Angular, Ember, Knockout, Backbone. This library, Polymer from Google, that helps you build web components. It's not really big and monolithic like that. It's not an informed opinion where they're trying to say how you organize your web app if you have a single page web app. And most single pages are kind of becoming apps already. They're a little more complicated than just words and pictures. And Polymer has gone out of its way to make sure that it doesn't offer a real heavyweight opinion about how your web app is structured and organized. They want to make sure that no matter which one you've chosen, their own or one of their competitors in the community, that Polymer can work nicely with those, right? And it's very significant to me about Polymer because recently, from this tweet, at the bottom you can see it's end of May, Google had their developer conference, Google I/O, and they finally delivered Polymer 1.0. And of course 1.0, that's a very significant milestone in any software's life. And so that's when it got very interesting, and I kind of accelerated my learnings. And I started thinking, how can I share about what I've learned? Because I've been keeping an eye on Polymer for about a year and a few months now. And last summer, it was just an experiment. And it was kind of heavy and slow and quirky and very opinionated. But now, as it's evolved, it's gotten leaner and lighter and faster and a little bit thinner layer. And web components are positioned by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, as a standard. But it's not built into every browser yet. Different browsers have different levels of implementation at a native level, like writing C++ or Objective-C, whatever the browser's written in. So that's why I like Polymer as a coder tool to help me build web components. Because as I pull it into my project, my web page, it's going to enable web components fully based on how much the browser has actually coughed up to me. And the browsers that are going to be implementing this are, let me say, the browsers that Polymer works on are the current modern evergreen ones, right? Firefox, Safari, Chrome. The mobile browsers, mobile Chrome on Android, mobile Safari on iOS. Internet Explorer, IE 11, most of 10. And an Edge, what is that, 12? IE 12? I don't know exactly. They don't really number it anymore. And this word polyfill, if you've never heard it, it's one of these terms that's out there. But it suggests that something is missing. Missing what? From the browser. And that this is going to fill in that functionality. Right? It's going to slide in that missing gap, filled in with features. Now, Polymer is this thin layer on a browser, making it work as much as it needs to. But Polymer also has a minor opinion about how to build web components, also known as syntactic sugar. And syntactic sugar are these things that are more expressive to human beings, like machines, software, browsers. You can throw whatever you want to at it, and it's going to grind it out and figure it out. But the syntactic sugar makes it a little bit more expressive and readable for people, right? Developer happiness is an important thing. That means that good things are built. So syntactic sugar, you're already familiar with that concept, either outright or intuitively. jQuery is a good example of that. jQuery sits on top of JavaScript so that you can get elements on your page, right? It simplifies how you grab one and then manipulate it in code. And here's an example of that, right? So at the top is jQuery on how you would pull a button by an ID off your web page. That's been around for 8 or so years now. But on the bottom, that's how you do it in raw JavaScript. So just like Polymer, just like jQuery offers some syntactic sugar on top of the implementation, think of how Polymer is doing the same thing for web components. Now the difference is that the top one costs you about 100 kilobyte download and the parsing time of jQuery. And the bottom is free because it's built into the browser. And I'll have some more to say about jQuery later. So syntactic sugar, you know, I'm a coder, I love sugar, I love tasty treats, so I'm always going to love a library, appreciate a library that offers syntactic sugar. Leads to developer happiness so that we can produce more awesome work more often. What are some examples of that? These are some of the things that when you look at Google Polymer, or you have looked at it, these are some of the things that it does, which is very cool. I invite you all to have a look at what this does to improve the way JavaScript hits your DOM, your document object model, all of the things that are appearing on your page, the buttons, the headers, the paragraph tags. Some of these are very modern and they're coming online and in other frameworks, and they brought it in a little bit. And they're all trying to reduce friction for developer happiness so you can build more awesome things with great tools. But it's also a danger, because as an engineer, you want to know how things work. You want to make sure you never drift away too far from the bare metal. You don't want to be dealing with it all the time because it's slower, but still you want to know what's going on so you can know if your decisions that you make are the right decisions for the right problem. Okay, let's see a demo. The more I get into public speaking, the more people tell me don't do live demos because stuff goes wrong. But I build things for a living, and I want to show you that I built stuff that's alive. Let's check out a demo. A little bit bigger. Cool buttons. Okay, well, the name has the promise of cool buttons, but right here is a very ordinary button, right? It lacks style. And I'm not just being judgy. There's literally no style on that button. That's just a straight up button. And I press it, and it tells us much ordinary. So it admits what it is. But that appeared. That's an interesting looking button. Let's check out what's going on underneath. So when you look at it, get the thing set up here. You can see right there that that's a cool button. Well, that's pretty interesting. That's not an HTML tag you've ever seen before. And maybe you can't see it now. now. In fact, let me see if I can get a little bit larger. So that is a cool button right there. And you can see that it's your own tag of your own creation. And I mentioned how you can build attributes on it, right? An attribute-based interface, which is fantastic because you don't have to edit JavaScript, right? You just poke values on it. Technically minded designers do it. Web developers do it. It's no sweat. You've done it all the time. In fact, you can see that this section has an attribute, ID and style. An image tag has an attribute, the source of the image. So what happens when I press this thing? Okay, so there's an alert. The button is tickling the page, and it says quantity is 42, and the product is life, the universe, and everything, which matches up with the attributes on the tag of the page, right? So the page, the index.html, is consuming this web component. And it's subscribed to an event that happens. So the button gets pressed, publishes a message, shouts out something, the page has been listening to it. And then that's kind of cool. These other buttons popped up. Almost looks like a style guide at this point, right? And you can see that these attributes, size, these are the values, small, full, wide, large. You know, it's my own creation. You can do anything you want with your web component. It's yours. And body colors, right? So you can see that matrix developing. And I love a good living style guide. But you can do something even a little bit more than just a style guide. Now let me show you a few other things. If I were to bring up the developer tools again, view developer tools. Document.get element by ID. What's the ID button? Accept. So I mentioned how jQuery is syntactic sugar sitting on top of what? Document.get element by ID. That's the raw JavaScript that the browsers implement to allow you to get an element on your page, right? So jQuery is sitting in the way of that, so to speak. So that means that the DOM knows what this button is, which is fantastic because it doesn't know what the button is. It's just existed now, right? So let me do something fun. Let me assign that to a variable. T equals. So now T is a variable that contains a pointer to that button. So I wonder if those attributes can be recognized. So there's one, body color, quantity, and product. So that's pretty killer. So I invented this button, and all the attributes are recognized by the DOM immediately. So it's a first-class citizen like any other HTML that's ever been invented in the world. And that's the power of web components. I'm using Polymer to help me build those now. I wonder what would happen if I changed quantity to 5,000. If I push this button, it instantly reports back quantity 5,000. And I might say, well, what's the product? Books. Quantity 5,000, product books. This is just to show how evocative and hands-on the web front-end world is, of course, but just to show how these web components can be immediately used by the browser and are first-class citizens like any other HTML element you ever see. And I posted this last night, and some of you already have it, but all this source code is up in this GitHub repo. So you clone it, play with it, see how it works. Oh, this is just an artifact just to show you what was in that browser window, the index.html, just as a reminder. And then here's a quick screen capture to support this all. So, what's a web component? It seems like I asked this question already. This is an important one, so I'm going to keep talking about it. And it's a W3C Standard. That's the World Wide Web Consortium. That's that standards body that's put together the final specification in writing for anything you ever enjoyed on the web, right? CSS3, HTML5, ARIA for accessibility, Flexbox, if you love you some Flexbox. Okay, so it's almost a standard. There's always a gotcha with technology. As I said, the browser makers they haven't all implemented at the same pace. They're keen to get it right, and I don't blame them, because once it goes out in the public, we're stuck with it forever. So they're taking their time to a certain degree. Who are they? These types of people. This is a tweet from Wilson Page, one of the people, I think he's on the Apple team, I can't remember for a fact now. You can look him up on Twitter. But who are they? They're browser makers, they're platform owners. Microsoft reps, Google reps, Firefox, I think there's a person from Opera in there. Who did I miss? Apple, they're all there. So these are the companies that are accustomed to building things that hundreds of millions of people use daily. They've got to be completely bulletproof and production ready. So I don't blame them for taking their time and getting it right. And this was April 24th, and they've had these types of meetings every month since then, right? They're pushing it forward. So what's a web component? They're a little bit complicated because they're not one thing, they're assembly of 4 things working in concert well together. 4 different standards are assembled. And that's one of the reasons why I say not all browsers have all functionality, because some of them, like Google and Chrome, have implemented all of them. But others, like Firefox, maybe they've only implemented 1. Or Internet Explorer Edge, the new browser in Windows 10. They've maybe implemented 1 and they're working on a couple others. What are the 4 standards? The first one is custom elements. That means that you can create your own future HTML tag, like pool button. You can name it whatever you want. What's the next standard? HTML imports. That means you can demand load in the HTML that backs your web component. Because a web component is presentation and behavior. The presentation is CSS and HTML. In my case, it was a simple button, but you can get more complex widgets that have lots of HTML in it. And you can already demand load JavaScript, through a script tag. And you can already demand load in CSS through the style tag. So this is kind of the natural extension of the other third core pillar of front-end languages. Shadow DOM is an interesting piece of this. And Shadow DOM basically means that your component is walled off and its style doesn't leak out. And why would it leak out? Because again, JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, very little opinion, everything's global. Everything wants to be spaghetti and global, and we want it to be rational and structured. So the Shadow DOM is a key part of that. And then the last one is a template. And a template is they say inner chunk of HTML. So it's a piece of HTML that's not rendered on the page until you tell it to. And template edges exist right now. Maybe you've used handlebars or mustache. So these are things that are a stamp of HTML that you could throw out to your web page when you get some data against it. What's a good example is like a contact list. You can go to your server, get all your users' contacts, you get that response, you just go stamp, 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 contact, contact, contact. So you can just imagine it's a full fill in the blanks kind of feature. Very important thing. You're going to want it. So all 4 together make up the web component standard. And I enjoy thinking about how we build fantastic user experiences. And web components give me much to consider because building on the web platform is it's liberating, right? There's a lot of great things you can do. It's very dynamic and very expressive, very hands-on, as I demoed before, and you know well. There's a lot of creative choices available, but it's difficult work. And it's difficult work because the web, if you know the history, it was built by scientists, right? To share research papers together in CERN labs in Switzerland, I guess. And they wanted to make sure that there's a way that their colleagues can easily discover each other's work. And those papers were a collection of words, right? Text. And they're easily discovered because they can link off to each other. And you can compare context of each other's research. And words can be very plain looking, so at least they had a little bit of formatting, some style. But if you think about the core experience of a browser, what is it giving you? And we know that the web is more than just a collection of online essays. It might have started off like that, but it's veered a long way from that original history. most pages now, they feel like they're a program. I mean, they're running code and they're changing state. It's an application. We need to be able to survive that in a lot of ways. And it's fantastic because, you know, the web, it's invisibly transferred to supercomputers that fit in your pocket. Like, all this work, it's crazy that we do it. I don't know, but I love it. And it seems complicated. But I signed up for it because I guess I like a challenge, and you all have too, for your own personal reasons. And sometimes you got to say it's amazing that it works at all, ever. And that's cool. Because we've been leaning into the web platform pretty hard for a long time now. And it feels like maybe we've been getting away with something. And do you have all the tools that you need to build what you imagine? One of the tools that I was interested in to go back in time a little bit as we're thinking about the future is HTML5. And this graph starts at 2005 and goes to 2015. It's from Google Trends. It's a great little way to map things. It's a sentiment analysis. How many people have searched for a term through the Google Web search engine, how many things they've crawled and seen published. And so I just searched on HTML5 because I wanted to try to remember how long we've been using this tech. And it seems like HTML5 tags, I was using them in 2011, right? I don't know if you all have a number in your head when you're thinking about the year. Which is amazing because it was only less than a year ago that they finished HTML5. The W3C, where they called it a day and said the spec is finished. And even though we've been using HTML5 for 3 or 4 years. And according to the wiki link at the bottom, they actually started the spec in 2008. So again, it goes to the testimony of how durable the web platform has to be, and all the browsers really work hard, figure out exactly what they want to build. So we're going through that right now with web components. Some people want it to be done more quickly and wonder why it's slow, or is it dead or whatever. Not dead, it's slower than you want it to be. But I think it's going to be faster than we think about the last thing that was so big. And HTML5 is fascinating because, you know, how many tags did it deliver? Like 20 or 30? And some of them are real winners. You know, when you combine that with the excellent advances in CSS, or some of the improvements they did in JavaScript, like, this is an era of riches for the open source web platform. It's pretty amazing. But even with all that power, we're still coming down to this, to div sanity, right? And it really is fantastic what y'all have been building on the web. I mean, it just shows how far human creativity can be pushed in the sheer face of panic and deadlines. But that's cool. But, you know, are you all waiting for HTML6? Like, is that what you're at home daydreaming about? Like, are you thinking there's tags, there's a little spot in your heart that's empty, and there's a tag that's going to fill it? Like, what is the world thinking? That HTML6 is going to happen? I don't know. I don't think so. So I wonder if I'm done with HTML. Like, what could they build for me that I'd be so excited about? You know, when's the last time I used an H6 tag, header 6? Like, what does that even mean? Or an aside? Or a fig caption? Or an abbreviation tag? Which is abbreviated ABBR, which is fantastic. I love that they abbreviated the abbreviation tag. But I wondered, you know, what is the W3C up to since 2014 when they finished HTML5? You know, this tech is awesome. It's giving me a fine living, and it drives my passion for invention. But there's a lot of tooling and thinking and deciding when you're building an interesting web app, which I'm purporting most web pages have turned into. Or maybe your project is a single page app and you're straight up doing it. And then you look at the history, right? This is an incomplete history. Just because I want my page to look like that, I left things out. But you go hit up that link later, and in your head, you're probably filling in the blanks of some of the things that you've been using or are using. and I'm repeating myself now, but this is an important question. Why do we do this stuff to ourselves, so to speak? It's because JavaScript and HTML and CSS, they don't help us decide, right? Everything's global, everything's a little bit crazy. So I wonder if all of this stuff can go away. Is it getting better? And so for me, I see web components as something that really does make it better. And maybe I'm not going to get HTML6. Maybe I'm going to invent the new HTML tags that y'all are going to start using. And maybe Bob and Jeff are going to create the tags that I'm going to be using. Or Jay Neal is going to create a really wicked cool tag that I'm going to start using. So the more I've discovered about this web tag, the more fascinating I think it is. And I think very highly of it. How about in our demo? That's what the slide tells me to do. Let's check out this other demo. TV listing. Okay. The TV listing is a more complex web component. It's starting to seem like a real micro interaction for an overall user experience. And you can see here, this is a straight up select box from HTML. And then here, if I could click it, music, comedy, football, and this list changes. And then I'm going to shrink this down real quick. This list is 6 entries long. Of course, that changes on the fly, 15 or whatever. This web component is consuming other web components. It's the cool button stuff from just a little bit before. And I brought up that style sheet, that living style guide. The style guide is alive. You can see that those attributes are probably used here. So let's have some fun with this as well. Go into Developer Tools. And let me see if I can. TV listing. So that web component is called TV listing. And it has one attribute, genre equals comedy. So let's get, and it has an ID, the list. Let's use the JavaScript to get a hold of it. Right? No problem. We already know that this is going to be a first-class citizen as far as the browser looks at the DOM, the document object model, the list of stuff that's in your HTML. I'm going to assign it a variable, t equals. So t is a variable, it contains a reference to that thing. And then so I can see genre, sure, it's a comedy. What happens if I reassign that to something like music? So it just changed on the fly. And it changed the output of the list. It went and got data from a service. And then it changed that select over there as well. What else do they have? Football? That's soccer. And the BBC. I thank the BBC for having a very open API where I could get the data easily. And if I clicked on this, it would send it, the web component, the TV list web component, sends data through a publishing subscription model. Any event-driven thing you ever done before on a web page, it sends it up to the owner. The consumer is just that index.html, just listening on that web component, and it got this big block of data. So you could be thinking how you can connect the dots from a web component that you built. It has all that business logic that it can present and behave itself. On the cool buttons thing, very little behavior, right? Click on me, I send a message. Plenty of presentation. You know, there's hundreds of lines of CSS in a button anymore. And then a really cool button would offer more styles. It'd have an icon, in text, it'd have an icon, a big emphatic text and a smaller text below, right? So that's good stuff to kind of squirrel away in a component and never kind of look at again, just to use it and consume it. You know, that investment, your future you are going to be happy about yourselves for making that investment. So that's a little example, a bigger example of a web component. And again, it's out there. That's just a simple reminder of that. That is all it took to bring up that relatively complex behavior, where it had really excellent presentation, and it also had more interesting behavior, because it went off and got a service response and changed the select and these other things. And then there's a picture to remind you later. Okay, so at this point you might be wondering, what's my deal? Why do I love web components so much? I'm an engineer. I've done plenty of things in the past, but last 5 years it's all been web front-end work. A little bit of back-end with Rails. In particular, I work at a company called Sabre. They're in the area, out in South Lake, that way. But they're a technology company that serves the global travel and tourism industry. And in particular, I'm there, and I'm on a project called Tripcase. It's an app you can download, and it's a freebie. And it looks like this. And so that's why I'm very concerned about web front-end, because that's an app you can download from Google Play or the Apple Store. It's a native app. But you would also get the exact same experience if you brought out your phone's browser and hit tripcase.com. So it's all the same web tech, but we deliver it through PhoneGap, also called Cordova. So we were able to take our mobile browsing experience and build it up as a native app through that very interesting open source technology. And so when I look at this app, and I'm very proud of it, and it's an award-winning UI, I know secretly that we've built several of these things over and over again, right? That's why I'm so interested in components, because you can build your, whenever you can, see as much as your UI and UX as possible, look and see what your common widgets and UI elements are. And that's not easy. I mean, I've been working on this for 3 years, so our project's evolved, and you can start seeing where the patterns are maybe over time. But try to make your list box once and improve on it. Your list of things, your interactions, your widgets, your UI elements. So this isn't the first time I've asked this question today. And we're still sorting it out together to get a shared understanding of what web components are, because it's a new thing. It's not easy, but it's worth learning. And your company might have a point of view. You might build your app internally using web components, or you might decide to expose it a little bit to the world. So your company might have a creative position or excellent services. And building a web component and sharing it inside your own teams, of course, your own company, but maybe out to the public as well somehow. And it could be kind of an open door into your always-on universe. What kind of way? Well, maybe a web component fronts an API. And so that way, someone who is a technically minded designer or a web developer, they don't know all the engineering necessarily that goes into these things. They can just drop your web component in and start hitting your API. They don't need to know XML or SOAP or even JSON or REST. Maybe your company's point of view is you want to put out a design aesthetic, like Apple did last year with their flat UI, or Google's doing this year with material design. So web components are a way that you can put that point of view out into the world and allow people to consume it and use it. Or maybe it's just a matter of data sorted in some sort of a way that's very important to your users. They can filter it and get it organized in the way that they want to. And all these things, they unlock interesting extensions of your user experience. So I told you earlier I was going to talk about jQuery a little bit, and this might feel a bit of an aside, but it works out in the end if you're willing to stay with me. And jQuery, many of you use it, you've been using it for years. How long? Probably 8 years? 9 years? 6 years? And it's getting old. And of course, I shouldn't be giving an ageism, but jQuery is not a person, it's a thing. So we always got to make sure that our tools are ready for the job. So I'm going to go after jQuery a little bit. Whenever I interview potential teammates, it kind of comes down to jQuery. Everybody's used jQuery. Okay, cool. So give me 3 reasons why jQuery is awesome. Well, because it makes selecting an element, grabbing a thing off of your web page easy. You can select it by a type, an ID, or maybe a class. Oh yeah, absolutely, of course. But JavaScript has all those built in. And why is that important? Because jQuery is 100 kilobyte download plus parsing time. And this is built into the browser. Well, if this is built in the browser, why did they build it in jQuery? Because 9 years ago, they didn't have that in the browsers. But all the browser manufacturers who move a little bit slow because they have to serve an audience forever and ever, they looked at jQuery, saw how it was awesome, embraced it and extended it, in fact. And now it's built in, and it's free, and it's super fast, because it's native code, and jQuery's got to get passed through JavaScript, which is just a little bit slower. Well, another thing that my prospective teammates will talk about in an interview is jQuery makes Ajax easier. With this, and Ajax, of course, is that great feature that allows your user interface to stay touchable and responsive while it's actually going off to a service and getting some data, like that list of contacts I mentioned earlier, and then it returns back and stamps them out with a template. Well, it turns out that this XML HTTP request, that is a native feature inside of JavaScript. And if you look at this example, if you look examples of this, which there are some in that demo repo, it's almost the same calls. So why use jQuery? Well, because it's a widget plugin standard. There's all these jQuery plugins that you can get and download, which is true. But web components do that. Web components are going to be the future now, where you can get these cool little plugins that serve some, right? Your calendar widget, your numerical selector, whatever it is. Web components can do this better. And it will eventually be built into all the browsers. All the 4 pieces of web components will be built in the browsers. And they'll be free and won't need to download anymore either. And Google Polymer will probably just maybe fade back or become something different. So for me, when I thought about this, that was the aha moment for me for, do I need jQuery anymore? And then someone else must have been thinking of the same thing, because there's a website called that. You might not need jQuery.com. And you might check that out later, because it's pretty instructive. It's very interesting. And again, jQuery has a download penalty and a processing penalty. Considerations. I might have also called this warnings, but that seems very warning-ish. So I'm going to call it considerations. So forget I said warnings. I want to give a little extra context to this, just in case to keep you thinking about it. jQuery, you know, I mentioned that it's an 8 or 9-year-old technology. It served its time well. Browsers have learned lessons from it very well and started to bring them in. Is there a need for jQuery in a modern tech stack? Maybe, maybe not. React.js, very popular. All the cool kids are using it. But when I look at it, it seems to have a lot of overlapping goals in the model view controller paradigm. They seem to do a lot of the same view stuff, which feels a lot like what web components are doing for a living. But React is very much out there in the community and has a ton of support behind it, which is great. But you might think about it as you're thinking about web components, especially if you're hearing that debate at work or you're part of that debate. And then these older versions of Internet Explorer, and these are still out there servicing some customers. And I say anything good in life, they had their time, right? They served us well. They really did advance the industry and best practices. But now even Microsoft is publicly saying when they're stepping away from these old tech, and they're going to support what? Win 10, maybe on Vista, Win 11, on IE 11 on Windows 8, and of course Edge, which is numberless because it's going to be evergreen, it's going to auto-update, is on Windows 10, which is a really decent browser. And then Polymer is also something to consider, right? Because I said it has a little bit of an opinion, right? That syntactic sugar. And I said how engineers, you know, we like to get under the hood. We want to see how the engine's running. We want to see how all the parts are connected. It's part of what we do for a living. It helps us make good decisions. And so Polymer might feel like it keeps you away from that a little bit. And even though it doesn't have an opinion about your overall app, like Ember or React or Backbone might have, it has a little bit of an opinion about how web components are built. And I come to you, and I'm going to admit I'm still learning about web components. I'm still a student. I'm no expert. turns out these people are experts. They're building the stuff, right? So I invite you to look on Twitter and follow some of these folks. And then I also invite you to open up your browser and hit some of those websites. They're going to be up to date. And if you don't really use Twitter much, I definitely encourage you to, because you can get access to all of the creators of your favorite open source tech. It definitely gives you a peek into their world about what they think is important, or maybe some ways that their stuff is being used by other people. It's just such a fantastic way to learn and to communicate, in fact. I mentioned now those 4 pieces of technology that make up web components. Some browsers have implemented some of it. Something that's fantastic, especially with that middle one, Microsoft IE, the platform makers themselves, they have websites that tell you where they're at. So when you go to these web pages, you're going to be able to see the browser makers. What have they committed to doing? What have they done? What's in their developer channel? Like Chrome has Canary, so you can download the Canary version of their browser, and you could be developing on stuff that won't hit the streets for 5 or 6 months, which is really great, because some of the tools are awesome, and it gives you like a material competitive advantage against your teammates who aren't using it, but also allows you to do compatibility testing. So this is also going to allow you to know what the roadmap is, as all the browser makers are committing to building their features in their browser. So it's just fantastic transparency. So I mentioned how I liked that one page where I showed all the buttons, and I said it's a style guide. And people say, well, style guides, they go dead. You don't update them. It's just a picture. It's just a web page and a wiki. Okay, well, we'll have a living style guide. That sounds much more better. You don't want something that's dead. You want something that's alive. But I also can't help but think that you can think of one that really is alive, where all of the pieces are operating, and they're examples of how to consume themselves. And those style guides that are alive, that are showing how they consume the web components that they build, what does that mean? That you can reuse them easily, right? You don't have to do this weird thing where you're pulling the source code of a CSS framework off of a GitHub account, and you like start kind of poking at it and pulling at it, maybe cutting and pasting. Web components are meant to be something that's a behavior in a presentation, and then you can go deliver them and drop them in. And then that's key, right? Software isn't an expense. It really is an investment into your business. And I love that web components allow you to shape your thinking, to create new mental frameworks. So the stuff that you invented, you can put it in a way that's going to be used again. Make yourself happier in a few months, maybe your team, maybe your company, maybe your community. And I mention open source a lot, and I can't help but wonder, some companies, if they're not thinking about it, can they take the pattern of open source and use it internally? And maybe that sounds dumb because everybody has a different customer or a different goal or different value that they add. But web components are one of these things where you can take the common elements, the common visual design language, and you can share this among all your teams at some level. And maybe some teams are using different opinionated frameworks, but it doesn't matter with web components, because that Google Polymer layer is supposed to interoperate. So that means the web component you build can be used by a team who's doing Backbone, or Ember, or React, or Angular, or just plain vanilla, straight up. Maybe with some Bootstrap or jQuery. And wouldn't it be great if your development team got smart and stayed smart on those common parts? And that you're able to share internally, especially in a big company, who can really throw a lot of brain power at something. What's that something? Well, they're always contributing back to the GitHub repo, the internal, not GitHub, the internal Git repo that's sort of operated and maintained like an open source project. And you can really propel your company forward. Web components make me think about that more than anything has before. So I mentioned all these other opinionated JavaScript frameworks, these MVC frameworks. and they don't have web components, and some of them have been out there succeeding for a while, and you can still have success. You can still think about building your views in Ember or Angular or React in a way that's going to be reused by as many people as possible. And I think it's important to build UI elements so you can kind of stop designing them over and over again. You don't need another list box, you don't need another button. But those people are still very important because they're going to be building the overall experience, the workflows, the micro-interactions, where they take those pieces from your common visual design library that's hopefully alive in some sort of open source shared, not open source, closed open source inside your company, some kind of a shared repository. And you can do that now. And then this all gets back to this for me, this innovation, this word innovation. I don't know what you think about innovation. I've been in conflict with it for a while now. Never heard or said the word until about 3 years ago. But it seems like everything is viewed through that lens, right? Like, what's innovation? And I finally decided that it's an outcome that our leaders are asking for. It's an outcome. But an outcome of what if we're all makers and builders? And I go back to what I said at the beginning, that you're going to learn something, you're going to solve interesting problems with it, and then you have to go share with it, right? Because otherwise this knowledge is caught up in your head, and knowledge wants to be free. So I'm good. I just freed that knowledge. I can go home and sleep well. But now it's in all of your heads. Like, what are you going to do with this knowledge tomorrow? So I hope that you respond well to that challenge. And I'm kind of curious what you think about web components. Is this something you're going to use? Anybody have any opinions on web components now?
Web components are awesome.
Thank you. That's absolutely true. In the back, yes, sir.
This makes it a lot easier for lean UX, where you can just drop in, drop out components, cuts down your development time, you fail faster.
Definitely, because if you have that internal repository, that common visual design language, and you decide, oh, I got a solution, or I'm going to quickly prototype out something, you can pull that stuff together. And it's going to look pretty decent and behave pretty well. And you can go get in front of people and say, what do you think? Would you pay money for this? These are ways to contact me, and forgive the self-promotion, but I'm so stoked. My book just arrived Monday from Amazon.com. And if you dig the kind of things I'm talking about, you might check it out. I very much appreciate it. And if you're super serious, I have discount flyers. I made my publisher give some 20% off flyers for y'all. I'm going to put these over here, and you can grab one on your way out. It's available on Amazon. So who else digs web components? Who else might use them? Please.
Yes, I would use them. Right now, I'm responsible for kind of building a library with visual UI components used across large segments within Horizon. And so like you're saying, looking for the patterns, I see them coming out of the design, put it into the library.
Right.
So, here's an easy way to use it. I use a lot of data attributes, kind of like you're doing for those custom attributes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to when I can make, instead of saying copy this chunk of code to make it look like this, just like drop this tag in and it'll look like that.
Right. It'll be a very exciting day.
Yeah.
And you can have success now without web components, but I feel like it's going to be so much more interesting and so much more easily grabbed. Any other reactions from anybody?
I have a question about styling.
Sure.
That cool button that you built.
Yes.
Did you build that from scratch?
Sure.
Did you style it from scratch?
Yes.
Okay, well, let's say that I have no design skills at all, and I
Right.
want to build things that look like Bootstrap, for instance.
Yeah.
Or something else that already exists.
Right.
How do I do that?
That's a tough one. You got to get a designer friend, or you got to have some style you can cut and paste
No,
from
I
something
don't
else.
mean, no, I don't mean the style part of it. Let's say that I find a style that I like and I want to duplicate it. I don't want to be creative, I just want to copy it.
Oh yeah, sure.
But do I have to manually go in and edit or create all the CSS to style those buttons? Or are there already style libraries or something like that existing that I can import to style my
Right.
custom built?
Some of those
web
web,
components?
sure, that's a good question. So some of those websites I mentioned on the resources page are a collection of things that are out there right now that look production ready. Material design is a great example. Google has web components for all their stuff. But if there's something utterly unique that you want to bring in, you will have to identify all that CSS and even the HTML that goes with it, and possibly some of the JavaScript if it's an interactive element. And you're going to have to bring that into your own web component. And that's going to be a bit of effort. And it's going to take some like engineering thinking almost, it seems, right? But once you do it, then you'll have it forever, and hopefully it's drop in. So there's definitely going to be some work behind that. But when you look at these websites, you can see the community is building, and there's solutions out there already, and they're going to be coming more, for sure.
But when it demands so much thinking and engineering work, so what's the ROI on it when the things are going to come up again, like more technologies evolve?
So it should definitely be a time saver. You should definitely be able to say, it's built already, don't need to put the budget up. Past that, what can I really say? It's reuse. And those are classical things you get in software engineering. They're difficult to achieve in front-end development. Because of the three languages, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, they just don't have any opinions on it. Web components is one of these core technologies that are going to help you identify ways to reuse these drop-in common visual design language things. So the return investment has to be modeled somehow that you're putting the time in now and it's going to be cheaper later. And that's the parable of the lazy programmer, right? The lazy programmer story that's been out there forever. It's not because I'm lazy, it's because I'd rather spend time, I don't want to just sit, okay, just blast code. 6 hours later, I'm done. You want to take 15 minutes and see if somebody else has already done it and then reuse that thing. Or to build it in a way that you're going to be happier later because you have it solved. And then if it's possible, you can amplify the savings across your company by building that internal shared repository that is closed and private, but is reminding you of what the open source community is doing. Because they're able to amplify those abilities. People are able to contribute across the world. You build it once and you just drop it in. Like Rails is awesome. PHP, maybe you can think of Symfony. Like MySQL and Postgres.
I have a concern.
Okay.
Going to, it's isolating it, the web component, it's not going to mess with anything else, nothing's going to mess with it. But what if you need to do like global updates? The
Right.
isolation now, it's going to kind of remind me of going back and changing all the style attributes of every HTML tag.
Right. Yeah, what if you make a breaking change? What if your API, your attributes all want to change? And that's always going to be something that any company faces with software. I don't know exactly how you do versioning with web components. It seems like an interesting problem to solve. People who, across your company, if you pull a copy of that button from the repo, from the shared common visual design language, then you're going to have to make sure that you don't pull the new version in unless you know it's safe. And as I'm talking to you about this, what it reminds me of actually is Bower. And Bower is one of these tools in the front-end world where Bower has a list, a JSON file, a list of all of your things, all of your packages, where the packages can be found, what version you're willing to accept when you say Bower install or Bower update. So that's one of these command line tools that allow you to reach out, not even knowing exactly where they are, reach out to the world, bring them into your localhost development environment, and then you can say what version you want it to be. And then the library has a version tag. It's a file called version. And you can say, and the maker can say what version you're at. And if it's a minor one, a dot upgrade, then that's probably safe to bring into your project. But if it's a big upgrade, 2.x, 3.x, then your Bower config is guarding you against it when you say Bower update. I don't know if people use Bower routinely. It's one of those things that's out there in the community. But that is actually what I would say go start looking at when you're thinking about versioning. And it's something that you're going to have to think about, like it's an architectural thing. I don't know if you're doing Agile and Scrum or Kanban, you're doing these 2-week cycles. It's like this is one of these things that kind of is outside of that, right? Like you can't like derive a user value out of it, make a smart thing in your core tech world. I don't know, maybe you can. In the back, I saw him first. Sorry, I'll come back to you.
Well, just to build on that, yesterday Google announced that they're introducing Polygit, which is going to do exactly that, at least for Polymer elements.
Oh, really?
It's sort of a CDN for for Polymer to do versioning. So yeah, whenever they update, you can automatically do a polygit update and pull in the new version of the Polymer element.
Is that
Awesome.
GIT or GET?
GIT. They haven't introduced it yet. They just announced it in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. That's an interesting data point. So maybe Bower helps, maybe Polygit will be there as well. And then you had something to offer. What are you thinking?
Oh, I have some questions actually. You touched on the point how, jQuery, the loading time and things like that. So how big is Polymer? And do you currently use Polymer in active product?
Right. So how big is Polymer? I invite you to go look. I don't have the number memorized. It's less than jQuery. Maybe it's 30K. So there's definitely a cost there. But in talking about jQuery, it was kind of setting an example of how we've done this in the past, and then we're evolving away from it. So just like when we look at this and say, oh, well, it's still something to download, the story is we've been there before. It's going to eventually get built into the browsers more rapidly, in my conjecture. And as am I using it? I don't speak for Sabre in this matter. My personal interest is yes, and my personal hobby projects, I will avoid using jQuery and I will use web components as much as possible. And I would definitely gladly tell anybody who listens web components are interesting, go out and look at them. Cool. So I don't want to keep you much longer, but you can find me on Twitter, or you can find me here in this room for the next 20 minutes, probably. And thanks so much for your time and attention.